Alright, hello everybody. Today what I want to do is talk about Rend. To start off, from what I've read, Rend is capped at 70%. So what does this mean? Well, I want to go over a few weapons and weapon combos in order to understand what weapon combos work the best, what weapon combos provide the most Rend, and basically what in general you should be looking to do with specifically the rapier build that I use, but also in general. I mean, Rend is a very strong thing to understand, and it is probably going to become more or less a meta thing to be going for. I mean, if you're not at Rend cap 100% of the time, then it doesn't make sense because Rend is so strong. It applies to everybody. Everybody gets the damage boost. So realistically, you should be aiming to get Rend cap all of the time. So how do we accomplish that? Well, let's first look at the rapier. The rapier does a 24% Rend with Sundering Riposte, which is very strong, and you can also run this on armor. It'll do a 14% Rend instead, but in my opinion, I think that if you're running the Riposte build that I do, I would try to aim towards getting this on the weapon, because if you're good at PvE, I'm specifically talking about PvE stuff here, then getting a Riposte should be pretty easy, and most of the times it's just going to be like a free Rend because you're just waiting for a mob to attack you and then you riposte and get a free Rend. So it's pretty much going to be a free 24% Rend all of the time that you use rapier. So that's just one thing to consider. So that is the rapier. There are no other Rend sources for the rapier, but we will look now at the warhammers. So this is a weapon that I've been trying out recently, and in my opinion, it is a very strong tool for not only crowd control and mob clumps, but also for Rend. It is one of the strongest weapons for applying Rend. If we look here at Shockwave, we will apply a 10% weaken for 10 seconds to a big mob clump. Now, that isn't even considering the fact that with Sundering Shockwave, we get a 14% Rend. And then, further from that, we can actually apply a Rend with Armor Breaker for 20%. So in total, that is a 34% Rend just from one weapon. Very, very, very strong. Now, here's where it gets crazy, is if you have a tank who's also running Warhammer, and we're going to assume that that tank is also running Sundering Shockwave on weapon, which typically they do. It's one of the best perks to run on weapon for Warhammer. And then they also have Armor Breaker. So if that's the case, and you both use Shockwave into Armor Breaker, that is instantly a 68% Rend. So that's basically Rend cap already, just from two weapons. And it takes maybe, what, 2 seconds to apply those two Rends? Pretty insane, honestly, pretty insane. And all it takes is 2 players with Warhammers. So that's, you know, a big deal. Now here's the thing, it'll last for 10 seconds, so if you apply both of those Rends, you switch to your rapier, and then just start burning. So you're gonna, typically it's, you know, some sort of combo with evade, flurry, detonate, and then evade spam. Well, you might be able to get one more flurry off, but typically it's just one flurry with some evade spams mixed in, and then, you know, that's a huge amount of damage if you're at Rend cap. So that is why I really, really like the Warhammer, especially for mob clumps. So that's where it really shines. Now let's look at a few other options for weapons that apply Rend, starting with the spear. So the spear is a very, very good weapon, and it probably is still the best secondary for the rapier. It does so much for you, and it applies so many buffs and debuffs. It's just insane. So this is the tree that I use, the build that I use, and the reason is because I really like Vault Kick. So typically if you're a spear player, you're going to always be using these two abilities, and then for the third one, you can use Sweep, but I use Volt Kick just because I like the stun, and I also like the cooldown reduction that comes with it. So that is just me, but let's look at Rend. So with Perforate, you can apply a 10% Rend for each hit of Perforate. So it attacks 3 times, so that's a 30% Rend. Now for single hit bosses or single target bosses, this may be the play just because it's quicker, and it also is a little bit more damage in general, because the Warhammer got nerfed a lot in terms of its raw damage. So using the spear will do slightly more damage and also apply Rend quicker. So that's probably the better option for single target bosses. And then also you have Skewer, which is the best weaken in the game. I mean, it's just, it can't even be compared. It's a 44% weaken from one move, so very, very, very strong. And yeah, that's the spear. So what I would do is say run Warhammer for big mob clumps, and then Skewer for bosses and stuff. Now another option you can do is Ice Gauntlet, which is just all around good. So you can get away with running Ice Gauntlet for mob clumps and bosses. So let's go through a few of these things. First off, we can apply Rend with Ice Shower. So this will apply a 10% Rend as long as the enemy is in that Ice Shower. So this is also good for mob clumps because you can kind of make a big semicircle with this Ice Shower and get a bunch of mob clumps within that. So let's say, for example, you have your tank sitting here and you have the Ice Shower all around it. It is a good way to rend most of those enemies. But you have to consider it is only a 10% rend, but you can run something like Deadly Frost, which is just a slight buff on that ability, where it deals 8% weapon damage per second, and also reduces that cooldown just very slightly. So it's decent. It's a 10% rend, and if your team is doing a lot of rend already, then this might be the weapon to use. Not to mention, it will do a lot of damage because you have DOTs that will basically work even when you're not using the weapons. So you can just put this down, swap to Rapier, still do damage with the DOTs, and then do most of your damage with Rapier. And then I usually use this this ability. I actually forgot what it was called. Ice Spikes, that's right. Just because it's a quick move and it's also low cooldown, and it can do a decent amount of damage if you get that final hit to come right up onto that enemy. So that is a decent one to use as well. But this is not usually going to be the weapon of choice when you're trying to apply the most rend. That will come down to either Spear or Warhammer. So yeah, I feel like I covered what I kind of wanted to cover in this video, which was Rend, and hopefully you've learned a little bit in this video, and I hope you've enjoyed, and I'll see you guys later. Goodbye.